thinking I've got a set period of time and there's something I have to get done, what can I get done in that time period? So we sort of have been digesting the strategic plan, and we reiterated it back to our presidents and said, we've taken a look at the direction you've given us, and we think what this says is that ArtPlace America is a 10-year project that exists to position art and culture as a core sector of community planning and development. That everything you guys have laid out comes together and says, we believe that every time a mayor seeks a conversation about the future of her community, it should be housing, transportation, art and culture, public safety, open space, all around the same table. Each of those is a sector that needs planning and investment from its community, and each of those is a sector with a responsibility to contribute to its community's future. And our president said, yeah, I think that's what we said. That feels right, that feels like what we're talking about. Because as we've been using this phrase, creative placemaking, really what we're talking about are organizations that are doing art with the explicit intention of changing a place. So one of the big sort of mind shifts that we've realized we need to get folks comfortable with as we're having this conversation is that when you're talking about creative placemaking, creative functions as an adverb, not as an adjective, right? So creative placemaking isn't just interested in making creative places, it's interested in creatively helping to make communities. So the other thing that was in that strategic plan that we affirmed back to our folks was that ArtPlace would now have 4 lines of business. So I think everyone is sort of generally familiar with our national grants program. And I'm sure some of you, all of you, have submitted an LOI for this round. If you don't register by 4 o'clock today, you can't submit by 4 o'clock on Monday. So if you haven't done that, go back to your office and do it. And that's going to continue. We're going to give away about $10 or $11 million a year to communities of all sizes across this country that are doing art with the explicit intention of transforming the place. And within that, we're really looking at projects that hit all sectors of community development. So we're looking for projects that intersect with agriculture and food, ones that intersect with housing, with transportation, with immigration and social justice, with workforce development, with economic development, with every sector of community planning and development. So that program is largely going to continue unchanged. I mean, we sort of have gone through some work making some more clarity around it and bringing some transparency to it, but largely that program is going to stay as it is. At the beginning of next year, sometime in January, we're going to announce 6 probably community-based investments, where we're going to be looking to invest in 6 different communities of 6 different sizes in 6 different regions of this country. And we're going to be looking to invest in organizations that are systemically incorporating art and culture into their work. So not just project-based, but what would it mean for a place-based organization to systemically incorporate art and culture as a core sector of everything it does. So I don't have more details on that because they're in the process of being rolled out. The 2 other areas of work that I think are really interesting and are both of which I think will be really important in our relationship with Rhode Island is our field building work and our research strategies. So our field building work we broke down into 3 components. So we're going to do a lot of work that's helping to connect practitioners with one another. So folks that are doing creative placemaking, how can they learn from and support one another in the work that they're doing? And a lot of this was informed by a grantee summit that we held in LA, where we pulled together about 250 of our grantees and did an experiment where we asked everyone to tweet out 3 things that their project needed, 3 things they needed in order to succeed. And then we asked everyone to tweet out 3 things that they had that they could share with someone else. And we discovered that about 90% of our needs could be addressed within our own community. And that the thing about local place-based work is that it is local and based in a place, so you don't necessarily know the other folks that are doing it. If you're busy here working in Pawtucket, you don't necessarily know the folks that are doing this work in Peoria, Illinois, or in Boise, Idaho. So how can we make some of those connections? So connecting practitioners. We're going to do a fair amount of work expanding the field. So we think there are a lot of folks that are interested in community planning and development who have not yet incorporated art and culture into their work. And my belief is that generally these are folks who are agnostic about the arts, not hostile, right? These are folks who just haven't particularly spent any time thinking about how art and culture can help them get done their core work. And now we've got about 189 grantee projects that we work with, and we can show up and say to a transportation commissioner, say to a housing commissioner, hey, what are you trying to do? Great, let me show you some ways that we can help. So really looking to sort of ask for more folks that are involved with community planning and development to incorporate art and culture into their work and to bring our communities even closer together. The third bucket of work is in some sense the loosest, but also the most interesting to me. And that is, how do we go about changing normative expectations, right? So folks walk into a situation, you wake up in the morning, and you have a certain set of assumptions and expectations about how the world exists. And we want it not to be special. We want it not to be unique. We want it not to be a unique program that art and culture is at the table for community planning and development. So we've been talking with some colleagues who often use the analogy of what's happened in this country with smoking, right? So 30 years ago, if we were having this meeting, everyone would walk into this room with the assumption that there would be an ashtray, right? You wouldn't even question it, you would just walk in, you would know, and you could light up your Pall Mall or your Virginia Slim or whatever else and smoke here at the meeting. Over the last 30 years, we've changed normative expectations in this country so that we all walked into this meeting today with the normative, with the assumption, with the normative expectation that there would be no ashtrays anywhere in a public setting. And it's a very different way that you get at that work than you do if you're trying to drive someone to vote a certain way on a ballot initiative, right? Mm-hmm. There was one line of work that was designed to how do we get people to vote on tobacco laws. There was another line of work about how do we change that assumption, and you often have to get people with values. It's often a values-based proposition. So those are sort of going to be the three buckets of work for our field building work: connecting practitioners, growing the field, and changing normative expectations. For research strategies, we again have three lines of work, because three happens to be a magic number when you're talking to foundations. It feels focused, but more than one thing, so it's that sort of sweet spot. So the three lines of work for research strategies, the first one is going to be around measuring. And that's really the way that we're going to start talking about evaluation and metrics. And we've often found that conversations about evaluation and metrics are a barrier to participation. When people hear those words, you get a little nervous, and you sort of get in this mindset that I have this important project I need to do, and then I have this other stupid thing that my funder is asking me to do. And that's not what we're talking about, right? When people are doing a creative placemaking project, they're essentially doing four things. They're identifying a geographically based community, right? A group of people who live and work together. They're talking about some change that community would like to see. And then they're proposing an arts-based intervention to help achieve that change. So what we're saying is that it's important to know whether that change has actually happened, right? And the reason it's important to know is so you know when you can stop, right? If you're trying to make a change in a community through a certain project, you should know if that change has happened or not, so you know if you can move on to the next thing, you need to keep doing the same thing some more, or you need to do something else entirely differently. So we're going to help people understand the full range of possibilities that exist for that. And what's interesting is we have a great project with a great evaluation system in Philadelphia that involves a guy who's on staff walking outside for 15 minutes twice a day and counting the number of people in various public spaces and writing it down on the clipboard. So it took 15 minutes of staff time, a pencil and a piece of paper, and they've got a data-driven project that's designed to look at how people are using a public plaza. Totally perfect for what they're doing. At the other end of the spectrum, we have a Native American Pueblo in New Mexico that's building an art and culture trail alongside a highway to increase community wellness through decrease in traffic deaths, increase in active recreation, and a number of other things. They're partnering with Johns Hopkins University on a full-fledged study about setting up a system of community wellness indices and metrics. So whether it's a piece of paper and a pencil, or whether it's a partnership with Johns Hopkins University, there's a huge continuum of ways that are available for knowing whether the change has happened that you're trying to make. So we're going to look at formalizing some of that and connecting it. The second thing is going to be around collecting and disseminating best practices, right? And in many ways, WaterFire is a perfect example of this. Barnaby and his colleagues had figured out this really magical intersection of water and fire and music and art and community. and have figured out that the ways that they're working can be deployed differently in local contexts, whether it's Sharon, Pennsylvania, or Riverhead, New York. So how do we capture the tactics and techniques that can help a community make a change and offer them up to say, hey, you're trying to do something, here's someone else who's trying to do it, here's some things you can learn from them. Yes, the local context will be different, but the way you do a call for artists is kind of similar. The way you deal with intellectual property issues is kind of similar. The way you deal with permitting issues is kind of similar. So how do we capture that together? And then the third line of work kind of marries those first two and deploys them for a specific audience. So we talk about that as translation work. And the way we came up with that is we were in a conversation with the San Francisco Federal Reserve. They have a Journal of Community Development that's going to do an issue on creative placemaking next year. And we were talking with the guy who runs it, who was like, all right, explain this whole thing to me. What is it that art can do? And so I'm a good sort of I have a nonprofit arts cred. So I started by talking about how the arts drive empathy, and by presenting the other within the frame of narrative, you can bridge and bond across difference. And I watched as Ian sort of mentally drifted. So I panicked. And I grabbed out to the work of Mark Stern and Susan Seifert, who many of you guys may know at the University of Pennsylvania, who talk about the ways that arts can drive stable communities. And I talked about the way that it really can increase social cohesion, it can increase community attachment, and it can increase civic engagement, the ways that people are active citizens. And all of a sudden Ian was back and lit up, and he said, oh, the arts can help lower tenant turnover rates. And I sort of said, well, I didn't say that, but said more about that. He said, well, if I'm a housing developer, if I'm a nonprofit housing developer, I'm trying to build community, not build a shelter. And so I want people who will dig into the community and call it their home. So if the arts are driving stable communities, they're really helping to lower tenant turnover rates. And so we realized that there was this important bit of work that we could do translating one piece of what the arts can do for a specific audience. So we want to come up with a line of products where we would take something like nonprofit housing developers, say, what do you care about? You care about lowering tenant turnover rates. Great. How can the arts help do that? The arts can do that through stabilizing communities. How can we know if that's happening? Great. Here are 3 ways of measuring it, so depending on what program you use one of these. Great, how do I put that into action? And we would say, take a look at what Broadway Housing Community did in the Sugar Hill neighborhood in Harlem. They put a museum in the middle of a permanently affordable, supportive housing environment. Take a look at what Concrete Design Initiative did in unincorporated Riverside County in California. You could deploy it in this way. Take a look at what's happening in New London, Minnesota. So all of a sudden we would give examples. We would say, here's what the arts...
Sandy Woods, Tiverton, Rhode Island.
Absolutely. I never try to use local examples because I don't like to be in rooms with people who know more than I do. It makes me very nervous to do. So those are going to be sort of the 3 lines of business for the research strategy. How do we sort of help people do the measuring work, knowing whether the change has happened? How do we capture the best learning around the tactics and techniques and toolkits that might be deployed in other local communities? And how do we tie that together for a specific audience to say, hey, housing developers, hey, food systems people, hey, immigration officials, what are you trying to do? Let us show you how the arts can do that. And then if we win, if we make the sale and the person says, yes, we're great, we're all in, we'd then be prepared to hand them and say, great, here are 3 ways that you can do it. Here are 3 ways to do it. So that's a summary of our 4-hour meeting in Chicago. So ArtPlace is now an organization that is committed to positioning art and culture as a core sector of community planning and development. And we're going to work towards this goal through our national grant program, through a series of community-based investments that we'll announce next year, through our field building work, and through our research strategies. So this has really been sort of our first public audience articulation of the things we talked about in Chicago, the way we're approaching it, and the way we're thinking about it. So in the time we have left, I think we've got about 15, 20 minutes left.